In this segment of my discussion of humble inquiry, I would like to again remind us what humble inquiry really is, and then tackle the question of how it applies in particular to team and organizational situations. As a reminder, humble inquiry is asking the question to which you don't already know the answer, bolstered by an attitude of inquiry, an attitude of interest in the other person, a curiosity. And the importance of that is that very curiosity, that interest in the other person, is precisely why humble inquiry is the first and most important step in building any kind of relationship. Whether you're just making a new friendship or wooing a girl or trying to talk to a teammate on a more personal basis, it usually almost always, or it almost always should, I should say, start with some form of humble inquiry. Not necessarily a question. It may be a revelation. You may say something very personal about yourself. But the attitude should convey that I'm telling you something personal because I'm interested in you and would like to share this and would hope that you might reciprocate with something personal back to me. So having said that humble inquiry is the basis for building any kind of relationship, how does this apply in group or team situations? I love athletic analogies, but of course the analogies of hockey and basketball, soccer, don't quite capture the issue because there is a certain degree of interdependence among the members. But I think where humble inquiry truly applies, it's where you have true interdependency. As in a seesaw, for example, if both people don't work equally hard, the seesaw just can't function. Taking this to the sports analogy, I would think a very good example would be the relay team. Some of you may remember that several Olympics ago, the US had by far the fastest 100 and 200 yard dash runners. But in two or three of the men's relay races, they lost the race. Why? Because they dropped the baton. So having the fastest runners didn't help if the relay race hinged on the issue of actual successful baton passing. So I think we have to really think carefully about what kinds of interdependencies we are talking about when we label a group a team. The casual saying that we're going to be a team now may not mean anything if there is not, in fact, any kind of real task interdependence. So in a helping situation, one could say that when there is true interdependence, as in a complex surgical team, which I'll tell you about in a minute, then you could think of the helping process in a team being perpetual mutual helping. Every member all the time in a helping relationship with every other member. And if the helping relationship itself hinges on a degree of personal trust and personal knowledge of the other person, then it's clear that for that team to get built requires humble inquiry from every member to every other member, and from the team leader to the other members of the team. So a team, in my sense, is a group of people who, in order to get the task done, are in a perpetual mutual helping situation. And they get into that situation through having built relationships, and those relationships were built through humble inquiry. Now, let's take a couple of examples. Many years ago, a colleague of mine who is now a professor at the Harvard Business School, Amy Edmondson, studied 16 hospitals that were all initially trying to develop skill in doing a new open heart surgical procedure that did not require as much ripping the chest open, but was more complicated and more delicate, and therefore required a fair amount of helping between the cardiac surgeon, the perfusionist who runs the heart-lung machine, the anesthesiologist, and the nurses and techs who were involved. What Amy Edmondson found was that 8 of these hospitals decided to try the operation, and after some experiments with it, abandoned it as being too complicated. The other 8 hospitals also tried the same operation and found that they could do it and adopted it as part of their regular procedure. So what was the difference? So Amy studied these 16 hospitals from every conceivable angle. For example, were they different size? Were they in different parts of the country? Were they rural, urban? And all the efforts to try to find a difference between the ones who did the operation in the end and ones who did not work out. Amy was not able to find any demographic or other structural differences. So then she went to talk to the various team members and the cardiac surgeons, and there she saw a difference. The cardiac surgeons who did not succeed in doing the operation in the end went about it in the following way. They apparently said to themselves, this surgery obviously requires a great deal of skill. So not only am I skilled enough to do this, but I better have on my team all the most skilled professionals that are available in my hospital. So he tapped the people who he thought had the professional competence to interact with him to do this operation. So they went ahead and did it and found that things happened during the operation that were unanticipated and that were actually outside the professional range of skills of what the different members of that team were able to do. And so they were not able to help each other and found the operation in the end too complicated. That's what the senior surgeon said. It's just too complicated. So we're going to go back to the old tried and true methods. Now, when Amy went to the 8 cardiac surgeons who did continue to use the operation, it's interesting that she got quite a different story. Apparently, these 8 surgeons also started with the recognition, because all of them had had to go through the formal training of what the operation was about. All of them recognized it was extremely delicate, complicated operation. So the first thing that these 8 surgeons did differently was they asked for volunteers. They said, we have a chance here to do something new and different. It's going to involve some unanticipated events. So I would like people who are competent in doing this job, but who would like to volunteer and work with me to do this experiment. Having acquired a team of volunteers, he then added, in addition to their formal training on the operation, some team building kind of training that would get the group very well acquainted with each other. So he did various things. He got a simulator. They practiced on the simulator. They got to know each other very well. And they recognized that during the operation, they really had to be a team in perpetual mutual helping relationships to each other. And because they had practiced and had gotten to know each other, they were able to do it. They were able to deal with the unforeseen circumstances. All the rank and expertise fell away in relation to get the job done. And whoever needed whatever information or any correction that had to be done, these teams were able to do it because of the relationship they had built with each other. Now, how do we describe such relationship building? In the Humble Inquiry book, I argue that the key is to overcome the formality of organizational roles and maybe even the formality of what we end up calling professionalism. Maybe professionalism actually isolates you, makes you feel like you're the only one who knows how to do this, and you're going to be so expert that you'll never need any help anyway. So maybe in the 8 units that didn't do the operation, the professionalism actually got in the way. What I think happened in the cardiac teams that did it was what I would call the senior cardiac surgeon personalized the relationships. And that personalization could be as simple as moving from your doctor so-and-so, but I'd like to call you John, and you can call me David. And nurse, you are Nurse Jones, but I think we ought to be on a first name basis, so I'd like to call you Amy. And when we're not with patients where we have to wear our roles in front of us, you can call me David. So that would be a very, very simple step in what I would call personalization. A further step might be, well, tell me where you're from. Where did you go to school? Do you have a family? We all know in our various cultures how to play by the rules so that we don't get over personal. We don't ask intimate questions about how is your marriage or things that the other person might be not willing to reveal or might even be embarrassed that he's being asked. So personalization is working the personal issue within the legitimate cultural and job contexts, not any old question. And underneath it all is, I think, a very, very important central principle that was first articulated in a unanticipated way by my son-in-law, who is a children's spine surgeon in the Seattle Children's Hospital. And I know that his stenosis operations are very, very complicated, that requires tight, perpetual mutual helping from his team. And I learned that his team was very diverse, different nationalities, different religions. And one would have thought that it would be very difficult to get them into a mutual helping relationship. So one day I did ask Wally how he managed this, and he gave me a one-line answer that I think has the wisdom of the ages in it when you stop to think about it. He said, without batting an eye, so to speak, he said, well, I selected them initially uh, for being able to do the job. But once I had my candidates ready, I took them out to lunch. I took them out to lunch. Now think about that. Eating right off the bat equilibrates status. Eating is something we do together. Eating is something that reduces the distance between the more senior and the more junior person. So taking them out to lunch as step one is actually probably the very wisest thing you can do. From that, you can then build on other kinds of personal questions and begin to develop these relationships. So it links, in a sense, to the cultural norm that we know that for many kinds of relationships, particularly where you need trust, even in the business context, in a lot of cultures, curiously, not so much in the US, but in a lot of cultures, having a meal together is a prerequisite to any kind of conversation that is going to be building up a trusting relationship. Americans are notoriously impatient with Japanese managers who really don't want to talk business until the meal is over. And on the other hand, getting back to Amy Edmondson's teams, one of the things she observed in the hospitals that were doing the cardiac operation was that the cardiac teams ate in the hospital cafeteria as a team, whereas most of the other doctors and most of the nurses had their own separate spaces in the dining area and always congregated with each other. So look at the symbol that this represented, that these cardiac teams that were doing this very complicated stuff were also eating together, and thereby symbolizing this mutual, perpetual helping relationship. So to review a little bit, this applies primarily when there is true interdependence. So we don't have to go around building relationships and trust willy-nilly. There may be many kinds of relationships where it doesn't matter, where we can count on help or performance even without building a relationship. But in any real counseling situation or in any team situation, it's essential to have a relationship, not only to get the helping process going, but as in a counseling relationship, even to determine what is the client's real problem. Because we know that when we first get together with a counselor, we often feel like we ought to test the counselor by maybe floating some part of the problem, but not really telling all of it. So if you're the counselor and you're meeting your client for the first time, instead of taking whatever the client says is his problem as the problem and jumping right in with all kinds of advice, consider seriously that the very first thing you should do is to ask a couple of humble inquiry questions. It might be, tell me more. It might be, can you elaborate? It might be, tell me a little bit about yourself. What those humble inquiry questions do is reassure the client that they are okay, that they've been heard, that they're being accepted, and that they're going to be listened to. And that very fact makes them feel better about themselves, makes them more trusting of the counselor, and therefore makes it more likely that they will reveal what is really on their mind. So, humble inquiry is the way of building a relationship through being interested in the other person, and it becomes critical in counseling and team situations when there is true interdependency. In another segment, I will discuss the particular problems of humble inquiry across hierarchical boundaries, and that's for another time. Thank you.